everyone, and welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on one of blockchain's most talked about and sometimes, frankly, terrifying threats, the infamous 51% attack. It sounds like something straight out of a, digital heist movie. And for some networks, it's actually been terrifyingly real. Our mission today is pretty clear. We're going to unpack what exactly a 51% attack is, how it works on a technical level, what its real-world implications have been for various cryptocurrencies, and crucially, what strategies the brightest minds in the space are developing to defend against it. Consider this your shortcut to truly understanding why this threat matters so much.
Yeah, it's a really critical discussion, especially when you look at the sheer scale of vulnerabilities out there.
Yeah.
At Q1 2025 Web3 security report, it painted a pretty stark picture, revealed a staggering, $1.63 billion in losses just from access control failures alone. Now, okay, 51% attacks aren't the sole culprits behind all those numbers, obviously, but they certainly highlight the relentless, evolving threat landscape that Web3 faces every single day.
Absolutely. And to give you this complete, well-rounded perspective, we've pulled from a truly diverse stack of sources. Everything from cutting-edge Web3 security reports and detailed academic papers to in-depth community discussions. So if you're ready, let's dive right in. My first question is, what is a 51% attack at its most fundamental level?
Right. So at its core, a 51% attack is an assault on a proof of work, or PoW blockchain. Think Bitcoin, for instance. It happens when a single entity, could be one person, could be a group, manages to gain control of more than 50% of the network's total computational power. We call that its hash rate. Now, if you're talking about a proof of stake or a POS system, it's a bit different. There, the attacker needs to control more than 50% of the network's staked native token. It's worth noting, too, that for some networks, like Chia, that threshold can actually be a bit lower, sometimes around 43%.
Okay, so they get this majority control, this sort of digital superpower. What's the first thing an attacker can actually do with it? What's the main goal?
The primary danger, and really the main malicious goal, is double spending.
Double spending, okay.
Yeah. Imagine this. An attacker sends, let's say, 10 Bitcoin to an exchange.
Right.
Sells it for dollars or whatever. Then, using their dominant hash power, they secretly build a different version of the blockchain history. One where that original transaction, the 10 BTC they sent, it just never happened.
Wow.
They effectively erase it from their version of the ledger, and those 10 Bitcoin reappear in their own wallet.
So they can spend it again.
Exactly, spend it again. It completely undermines that core promise of immutability in blockchain, which is, one of its foundational pillars. Beyond double spending, they can also cause, network disruption. This means they might prevent new, legitimate transactions from getting confirmed, or even block other miners from finding blocks entirely, basically censoring activity.
Okay.
But it's really crucial to understand what they cannot do. A 51% attack doesn't grant access to other users' private keys. So they can't just steal Bitcoin from other people's wallets directly. Nor can they change the fundamental rules of the network, like, creating new coins out of thin air. They're disrupting and rewriting recent history, not creating totally new realities from nothing.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting for me, the mechanics. How does this whole shadow chain thing actually work? How do they manipulate the blockchain on that technical level? It sounds incredibly clever, if, nefarious.
It truly is clever, yeah. On proof of work chain, you've got all these miners competing constantly. They're trying to solve complex cryptographic puzzles. Think of it like a huge digital lottery. Miners are trying to guess a winning number. Hash rate is just how many guesses per second your computer setup can make.
Okay.
The more guesses, the higher your chance of winning the next block and adding it to the chain. We measure this in, hashes per second, kilohashes, mega hashes, all the way up to terahashes, petahashes, exahashes per second now. Huge numbers.
Yeah.
And the network itself has this built-in mechanism to adjust the difficulty of those puzzles. For Bitcoin, this happens roughly every 2 weeks, or every 2016 blocks. The goal is to keep the average block generation time steady, around 10 minutes for Bitcoin. Now, in a decentralized system like this, the fundamental rule is that the longest, or sometimes called the heaviest, chain of blocks is considered the valid one, the true history.
The longest chain wins.
Exactly. So what an attacker with majority hash power does is they start building their own chain, but they keep it secret, covertly. This shadow chain diverges from the public one everyone else is working on. Imagine it like a secret race. The attacker's building their own private road, and because they have more power, they can pave it much faster than the public highway.
Faster block creation.
Right. Because they have over 50% of the hash rate, they produce blocks faster on their private chain, Once their private road, their chain, becomes longer than the public official chain, boom, they release it to the network. This new, longer chain then replaced the one everyone else was using. And importantly, it undoes any transactions that occurred on the shorter public chain after the point where the attacker's chain secretly branched off.
And that's the double spend window.
That's precisely how they enabled the double spending we talked about. It's why transactions are often described as probabilistic. They're never truly 100% final immediately, because theoretically, a longer conflicting chain could appear and outgrow the current one. But the probability of that reversal drops exponentially as more blocks are built on top. It gets vanishingly small very quickly on a strong network.
Okay, so given this potent threat, this potential to rewrite history, the obvious question arises. Has Bitcoin, the granddaddy of them all, ever actually fallen victim to this kind of attack?
That's a great question. And interestingly, the concept of a 51% attack, it's as old as Bitcoin itself. Satoshi Nakamoto described it in the original 2008 white paper. The assumption, or maybe the hope, was that honest nodes working together would always collectively outpace any single attacker. And so far, that's held true. The Bitcoin network has never experienced a successful 51% attack.
Ever? Wow.
Never. It's mainly due to its absolutely colossal and globally distributed hashing power. It just makes such an assault practically and economically infeasible. The cost just to acquire the necessary mining equipment would exceed, what, $7.9 billion? Just for the hardware?
The gear, yeah.
Yeah, and that doesn't even count the massive ongoing electricity and maintenance costs. But it's more than just the raw cost. Bitcoin's security is also a testament to game theory in action. If you somehow succeeded in attacking it, you'd likely crash the price, devaluing the very asset you're trying to exploit. So honest participation, just mining normally, is inherently more profitable for everyone involved. However, while it remains theoretical for Bitcoin, the threat became very real, very practical for smaller cryptocurrencies, the ones with lower hash rates, less distributed networks.
Right, easier target.
A much easier target. This pattern reveals a critical vulnerability, really, the long tail of cryptocurrencies. While they're often innovative, they frequently lack the economic security blanket needed to withstand even moderately resourced attacks. It creates this kind of tiered security landscape in Web3. And we've seen several significant examples. Ethereum Classic, for instance.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
It suffered multiple 51% attacks back in January 2019 and then again in 2020. Led to major disruptions, financial losses, reorganizing transactions to double spend. Bitcoin Gold was hit in May 2018 and again in 2020. Vercoin faced an attack in December 2018, Horizon in May 2018. Even Bitcoin Cash was targeted in November 2020.
So it happens.
It definitely happens to these smaller cap coins. There was also that notable incident back in 2014 with the ghash.io mining pool. They actually, for a time, obtained 51% of Bitcoin's total hashing power.
Whoa, really? For Bitcoin?
Yeah, I remember the entire Bitcoin community was basically holding its breath. It was a real stress test of the system's underlying trust mechanisms.
Yeah.
But interestingly, they voluntarily capped their own hash rate.
Yeah.
Brought it down to 39.99% to restore trust. It kind of illustrated how crucial community response and shared values can be in a decentralized system.
Okay, so beyond the technical side, what's the actual financial fallout when these attacks do happen? Are we talking small ripples or are these like massive tidal waves of loss for users and investors on those affected chains?
The financial impact can be very significant, yeah, especially for those smaller networks we mentioned. Event study data looking at this shows that known 51% attacks generally lead to substantial negative cumulative abnormal returns. CAR, they call it.
CAR, right.
For the attacked cryptocurrency. For instance, Ethereum Classic saw its CRR drop by up to 40% around the attacks. Vertcoin, up to 25%. So yes, it can absolutely be a tidal wave for those specific coins. What's particularly fascinating, though, from some studies, is that unreported 51% attacks, they can actually show an initial positive impact on CIR.
Positive. How does that work?
Well, the theory is it could create opportunities for pump and dump strategies.
Yeah.
Attackers who know about the vulnerability, maybe even executing the attack secretly, they possess private information. They could potentially manipulate the price upwards before the attack becomes public, amplifying their gains from the double spending itself.
Huh. That's devious.
It highlights how the market reacts, or, well, fails to react, when crucial information is suppressed. And then you have hard forks. They aren't always attacks, right? Sometimes they're planned upgrades or community splits over direction. These can have really mixed economic impacts. For larger cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, hard forks have sometimes led to significant positive CIR.
Like with Bitcoin Cash Fork.
Exactly. Often because new tokens get generated, holders get free coins on the new chain, and maybe expectations of success for the new chain rise. But for smaller altcoins, hard forks can often result in negative CAR. There's fear about the community splitting, reduced network effect, potentially reduced security.
Makes sense.
And then there are wallet attacks, things like exchange hacks. Those consistently lead to a significant negative impact on the stolen cryptocurrency's returns. We've seen examples showing CRR losses from -15% all the way down to -83%. The studies looking at all this really emphasize that timely disclosure of attack information could limit the damage and lead to more efficient market responses. Transparency helps.
Okay, given these pretty stark risks, what are the smartest minds in the space actually doing to make blockchains safer? What are the sort of cutting-edge defenses being developed or implemented right now?
Right. It's definitely a multifaceted approach. There's no single silver bullet. For proof-of-work chains, the most straightforward defense is simply to increase the network hash rate, grow the network. Basically, encourage more participants to join with their mining hardware. That makes it computationally harder and more expensive for any single entity to gain that 50% plus control.
Strength in numbers.
Exactly. Then, many networks are also opting to adopt proof-of-stake, PoS. We talked about that earlier. Here, validators who propose and confirm blocks are chosen based on the amount of cryptocurrency they've staked or locked up as collateral. This makes gaining majority control immensely more expensive in a different way. An attacker would need to acquire and stake a huge amount of the asset itself, often 51% of the total staked amount. That's usually a massive financial barrier. And some networks are even exploring hybrid consensus mechanisms, maybe combining PoW and POS elements for potentially an extra layer of security.
So switching to proof of stake sounds like a strong defense. Definitely changes the economics. But I have heard some, maybe PoW proponents, argue about a self-healing property that POS chains might lack. Is that a legitimate point?
That's a perceptive question, yeah, and it's a key point of discussion in the community. Bitcoin, being PoW, is largely considered self-healing in this context. If an attacker temporarily gets 51% control but then loses it, once the honest majority of hash rate returns, security is sort of automatically regained. The honest miners will naturally build on the true chain, eventually orphaning the attacker's blocks. GIA, which uses something different called proof of space-time, also seems to exhibit this property. However, many traditional POS chains don't inherently have the same automatic self-healing property if an adversary gains control of a majority of the stake keys. They often require more explicit, maybe off-chain coordination or specific fork choice rule adjustments for recovery in those extreme scenarios. It's definitely a key philosophical and technical difference in their design. Beyond the consensus mechanism itself, there's also work on business continuity planning, or BCP. Yeah, this involved the issuers, maybe the foundation behind a token, using off-chain databases or snapshots. The idea is they could potentially recover ownership records or balances after a major hard fork or a successful attack, maybe designate a specific contingency chain as the valid one going forward. Honestly, the efficacy of BCP in a real crisis is still a bit of an open question. It hasn't really been tested under significant stress yet.
Right, theory versus practice.
Exactly. Then you have smart contracts themselves being used for controls. Things like deny listing, barring specific malicious addresses from interacting, or allow listing, only allowing pre-approved addresses, using privacy-preserving identity verification with tech like zero-knowledge proofs to know something about a user without revealing their identity. You can even designate a controller entity within a smart contract, like a multi-sig council, that can manage token access, maybe pause transfers, block fraudulent transactions, or even amend the contract code in emergencies.
So more centralized controls, in a way.
Potentially, yeah, it's a trade-off. We're also seeing permissioning of node infrastructure, like creating a subset of known, trusted validators, perhaps run by regulated entities like banks. This can help address compliance needs and certain attack risks, though it moves away from pure permissionless decentralization. And of course, scaling solutions layer 2 protocols like the Lightning Network, rollups, sidechains. They aim to increase transaction throughput and reduce load on the main chain, though they still ultimately rely on that layer 1 chain for final settlement and security.
It truly sounds like a constant cat and mouse game. Ingenuity on the attack side, matched by ingenuity on the defense side. Beyond these direct attack vectors, like 51%, what other, maybe broader systemic risks do these permissionless blockchains face that the industry is grappling with?
Absolutely. The challenges definitely extend far beyond just direct attacks. It's complex. Ultimately, the risks facing permissionless blockchains aren't just technical, are they? They're deeply interconnected challenges, spanning economics, governance, legal issues, even just human behavior. It highlights the immense complexity of trying to build truly decentralized and truly resilient systems. For instance, there's significant governance risk. Just figuring out who makes the rules and how. The decentralized nature can make traditional due diligence really difficult for regulated entities trying to engage. Hard forks, as we said, can lead to asset price volatility or even loss if one chain fails. And off-chain governance, like decisions made by core dev teams or foundations, can sometimes obscure potential conflicts of interest.
Right.
Legal and compliance risks are also just pervasive. Pseudonymity complicates things like KYC, AML-CFT, sanctions compliance. It's a constant headache. There's even gas fee risk. The risk that transaction fees paid to miners or validators might inadvertently go to illicit or sanctioned entities.
I hadn't thought of that one.
Settlement finality risk is another big one, related to the 51% attack idea. That probabilistic settlement means transactions are never absolutely mathematically final on many chains. There's always that tiny, tiny chance of a reorg. We see orphan blocks happen daily on networks like Bitcoin blocks that get mined but aren't included in the longest chain. Their transactions usually get remined later, but it shows finality isn't instant. It creates a level of uncertainty.
Okay.
Privacy and confidentiality risks, too. Even with pseudonymity, the open nature of most public ledgers raises privacy concerns. It can potentially enable cyber attacks or sophisticated economic exploitation, like maximal extractable value.
I know MEV.
MEV, yeah, that's a whole other deep dive. Definitely. We also grapple with liquidity risk. The transparency of these networks can actually exacerbate runs on crypto assets during times of market stress. Everyone can see the outflows. Plus, many popular permissionless blockchains still have relatively low transaction throughput compared to traditional systems. That can lead to network congestion and soaring transaction costs during peak demand. And finally, just the overlay of political, policy, and legal uncertainty. It hangs over everything. Sudden regulatory changes, like bans on mining in certain countries, can directly impact network security by reducing hash rate, potentially increasing the risk of a 51% attack. It's a truly complex web.
Well, this has been an incredibly insightful deep dive. Really unpacked a lot about the 51% attack and the broader security landscape of blockchain. It seems clear that while a 51% attack is a critical threat, especially for those smaller networks, the economic barriers for major chains like Bitcoin remain formidable, very high. And it's also really evident that the industry is constantly evolving, isn't it? Constantly innovating, implementing new defenses, new solutions. It feels like a nonstop effort.
Exactly right. Blockchain security is fundamentally a dynamic field. It's not static. It's this continuous process of innovation and adaptation. Always trying to balance those core tenets of decentralization with the absolute necessity of robust protection against these threats. For anyone listening, anyone navigating the Web3 space, knowledge is definitely power here. But active participation, staying informed, and just critical thinking are equally essential.
That definitely leaves us with maybe a provocative thought for you, the listener, to consider. As blockchains continue their push towards greater decentralization, how much responsibility should individual users actually bear for the overall security and resilience of the networks they participate in? Is it all on the core devs, or do users have a role? And maybe even bigger picture, can true decentralization ever fully align with the need for, let's say, perfect security and the demands of regulatory compliance? Or are there inherent tensions there? Something to think about. Thank you so much for joining us on another deep dive. We really hope this exploration helps you better understand these fascinating, sometimes complex topics, and that you feel a little more well-informed. Until next time, keep digging.